All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our monthly Digital BC call. We're trying out new tech here today, so forgive us as we go through this on our Teams live broadcast. My name is Jillian Carruthers. I'm the Senior Executive Director of Digital Identity and Trust, now over in SITS. Very happy to bring you back to our, what I would call a season of awesome digital identity, or well, I guess I shouldn't say digital identity, digital BC learning. So for those of you who aren't familiar, what this is where we bring together a community of folks interested in what's going on in BC around the digital topic. Gives you an opportunity to engage and hear from experts like we will today from what's going on across the country and more broadly. I will say, I know many of you are coming to us from various different parts of BC as well as the country. I am joining you from Victoria, BC. So the traditional territories of the Wissanic peoples, the Esquimalt Songhees nations. So we know that their historical relationship continues today. Also an incredibly important topic. I hope you took some time on Friday to do some of your own personal learning and continue your learning journey around which traditional territories you're engaged on a regular basis as well. And I did also want to say to those of you joining us who might find this helpful, I am today wearing a lovely black colored shirt. I have curly hair today, all pulled back into a bit of a ponytail. I have my earbuds in as well. I have blue eyes. I smile probably way too much while I talk, which I get feedback on. Might be a good thing or bad thing. Also a hand talker. And my collared shirt has white buttons just to contrast our lovely background. Few more small pieces of housekeeping, and then I promise I'll be quiet and get to Namita Sharma, who has all the good stuff today. This is being recorded, so this will be broadcast to an internal and external audience, as you are aware. You can also turn on live captions. It's a bit different in this format. Top of your screen, there's 3 ellipses. You'll see that underneath the More button, and there's the Turn Live Captions on. You have a couple of language options as well this time. We're also going to be doing Q&A a little bit differently through MS Teams this time. So you'll see the Q&A as well inside your live stream. So feel free to ask any questions as they come up. We will shift to question and answering about halfway through here. And almost last, podcast. So for those of you who are familiar, we do a follow-up podcast. We'll continue that practice this season, really looking at any of the questions we don't get to or diving deeper into some of the topics that come up. And this is the last, which is there's always a survey. The survey is incredibly important. It's helped us shape who we're going to talk to as we go through the lovely next couple of months. So without further ado, let's get to the fun stuff. Today, governance. I mean, there's no denying that we've grown immensely in how we deliver services, both here in BC as well as across Canada. And we're really starting to work how we prioritize, the design and the delivery and that value creation inside that digital environment. And we also know that our structures are so embedded in how we work. And we have just these incredibly challenging, call them silos, call them various different things that we have to work through. And governance as an embedded and challenging structure is certainly a key priority. So it's a big one. Today, I wanted to invite Namita Sharma from our Ontario Digital Service to really dig in and discuss. Namita, amazing to have you here with us. Tell me a bit about your background to get us started, and then we'll dive into some of the deep stuff.
Hi, everyone. Well, firstly, thank you for having me here. I'm Namita Sharma. I am a senior manager at the Ontario Digital Service. I manage Ontario's digital governance portfolio. I joined the Ontario government, about 14 years ago, after serving in the nonprofit sector for a few years. And in all these years, I've had the privilege to work as a coder. Well, I started my career as a coder, a webmaster, a product manager for a really, really long time. But at heart, I think I'm a digital strategist and enabler. On a personal note, I am a first-generation immigrant from India, settled in Ontario. I have twin girls and a boy, and I enjoy reading, music, and I binge watch television when I have time.
That's amazing. I share the binge watching theme, so that we'll have to catch up on that one. Yeah. Let's start out simple here, because I know this isn't always easy for folks. There's lots of interpretations around governance and how it works, and it means different things to different people. So, sometimes people say it's steering committees, or it's, having really good documentation that shows the lineage of where decisions get made. But for today, how are you defining governance?
That is an excellent question, and thank you for bringing that question. By digital governance, I am referring to an assessment service. We call it Digital First Assessments, or DFAs for short. DFAs consistently evaluate the design, build, and upkeep of digital products and services. And these assessments happen at specific phases or stages of service design. The result of these assessments could be an approved, course correct, or a halt. The results of assessments come with loads of actionable advice, which is essentially meant to help our deliverables align better with Ontario's digital service standard. These evaluations are mandatory for anything that is public facing or over 1 million in budget. And to date, if I got that correctly, we've conducted over 340 assessments over these 3 years for over 235 services from across the OPS. So Ontario's digital governance is essentially rooted in legislation and delivered under the authority of our Chief Digital and Data Officer. Having said that, we believe good governance is not just about setting the rules and checking for compliance. It really is about setting the right rules, firstly, enabling and empowering teams to follow those rules, and then check for compliance. So that's what we're trying to do here.
I love the enabling and empowering teams as the priority, because that becomes just the key component to how we actually deliver services. And I mean, the first thing that comes to my mind at times when you say we have to do an assessment, or there's some sort of compliance thing layered on top of the work that we're doing, I get that thing in the back of my neck where I'm like, oh, it's going to be a bottleneck. Like, we're going to be waiting. So that's an amazing way to frame that and hear that focus. Kind of rolling on this. So Ontario has legislation, if I'm correct, that powers digital governance in the province. What has that journey been like? Can you share some of that and some of your learnings from that? Because that's not really where we are necessarily just yet.
Totally. So Ontario is one of the few jurisdictions that has legislation to power digital governance. Today, I'm going to share a brief story of our roller coaster ride and some of our key learnings from it. So let's rewind back to about 2017. We published a set of 14 guiding principles that could help any team develop simpler, faster, and better services. We call it Ontario's Digital Service Standard, or the DSS. We hoped that this would help teams do things differently, think differently, but there was very little uptake or interest. We thought of embracing, so we started to kind of embrace the DSS in our work and demonstrate how it could change outcomes. There was still no radical shift from the way we were doing things. And whatever little we saw, it was from teams that were anyways ahead of the curve. So this led us to thinking about ways to push harder to accelerate transformation, and that ended up in the Simpler, Faster, Better Services Act in 2019. The Act authorizes the Chief Digital and Data Officer to evaluate services and lead digital and data transformation across Ontario. To operationalize this authority of the CDDO, we launched this evaluation mechanism that I just talked about, Digital First Assessments. DFA itself is a rapidly iterating service, and I don't use the term rapidly iterating and agile lightly. It was a damn steep curve for us, and we were a really small team of just maybe, I think we started with 2 people, so 2 to 3 people. And by rapidly iterating, what I mean is, for example, when we started assessments, the questions we were getting were, who are you and under what authority are you operating? So we referred to the legislation, and then the question was, where does it say that it applies to our work? So we came up with directives. Then it was, okay, fine. So what do you want to know? And we shared our list of questionnaire. And then it was things like, where do I find those questions? So we thought, oh, that's a great question. They want to know the questions in advance, so why don't we just publish those? So we put them on the intranet for anyone to see, regardless of what stage you're in. You can check the questions that you will be expected to answer. And then the ask was, tell us more. So we were like, sure thing, come to our orientation sessions and bring your entire team and your questions. Let us talk. And that's how the start was. In all of this, actively seeking feedback and actioning it continuously help us demonstrate that we care and we are responsive. It built the trust, the underlying trust, with not just the delivery teams that we were assessing, which was really, really important, but also with our executives, who in turn supported our efforts and cleared roadblocks for us. So now we had legislation and we have a mechanism to enforce compliance. It should all fall into place, you would think, but the ground reality is a bit different, which brings me to our learnings. So I'll share the top 3 learnings that I think are important. So lesson number 1, legislation is one thing. It gave us the foot in the door, a critical catalyst for transformation, but compliance with legislation is a whole different ballgame. Change is hard, and it's much, much harder than you think. We realized that teams, for the most part, did want to do things differently. They wanted to deliver their best, but that definition of best varied. And it was severely compromised by the challenging environments that these teams were operating in. These challenges related to skill sets, timeframes, funding models, and the list is long. Which brings me to lesson number 2. So simply issuing results is not going to help. We learned that we'll need to roll up our sleeves and pitch in, simply because things that we're expecting teams to do are new. They're new for them, and they don't have the skill sets. So we can either watch them struggle and fail, or we can offer guidance, support, and resources to take them through this new way of doing things and build strong partnerships and allies as we go. Very early on, we realized it was not going to be enough to simply evaluate and give that result. If teams knew how to action the recommendations we were giving, they would have done it already. They need a bit of handholding and guidance to understand what we mean by user research. It's not a survey, and usability testing is not UAT. So our supports for teams that get a course correct at halt or a halt, they range from guidance on user research to observing actual user research sessions, to creating user research plans, to procurement advice, to hiring for digital skill sets, tech guidance. So on basically supports that are custom to what the need is, so that essentially there is a quick turnaround time for the team to action our requests or our recommendations. And lastly, lesson 3, which touches on what you just mentioned, Jill, governance can be burdensome. It is burdensome. So right-sized and timely governance makes it meaningful for the team and sustainable for the enterprise. So that's what our focus has been.
I love that. And that right-sized timing is so important. The other thread that I pulled out there was just that continuous thread that really ties delivery teams all the way through executive is that we care deeply about the services we are trying to provide. And no matter what process, or even when you're talking about people asking sort of those questions of like, let's go, what are the directives? What is the authority? Like those government-y type questions we hear, that thread of we genuinely care about the services that we want to deliver, and having that front and center in that governance frame it's so neat to see. Tell us a story of a challenge, a triumph, or something, and then we'll kind of pivot into some of the questions that are flowing in.
Cool. So lots of challenges. I could talk about them forever, but also triumphs. I mean, that makes all of this worth as a public servant. So like I mentioned earlier, right from the start, it was an uphill battle because the service or the assessment service was seen as yet another mechanism or checkbox exercise, adding to the existing burden. But today I want to talk about this very specific twofold challenge, and that was a fairly unexpected one for me. What I ran into was no one, and absolutely no one, wants a course correct or a halt, and no one wants to issue a course correct or a halt. But then, if we don't do any of this, how do we change the status quo? That was the challenge. When we launched DFAs, being fully transparent, our initial process, it involved the assessment result being issued right after the assessment meeting, with both assessors and delivery team face-to-face in a meeting room. Anxiety levels were high, and so was the level of awkwardness. I actually wrote a Medium blog about this a while ago. And I encourage you all to read it if you're interested. So how could we, and the dilemma for me was, how could we make it less of a guilt trip for assessors? And more importantly, how can we make it a win for delivery teams? So we brainstormed what could good look like. We documented it in the form of rubrics. So for every stage of service design, discovery, alpha, beta, and live, what do we expect to see in a team's work at the end of discovery versus at the end of alpha? And with that in place, we encouraged assessors to simply follow the rubric for their checks. So it lifted the burden of that guilt significantly, and it standardized our assessment results. To make it a win for delivery teams, we actually published these rubrics. So a delivery team knew what an assessor would be looking for in their work when they got to it. They could tailor their work accordingly. And coming to think of it, that was the overall goal anyway. It was not about issuing the course correct or halt. It was to push teams and encourage teams to actually do the work in a certain way. In terms of triumphs, there's several, and we've started to write these out as DFA stories. And this is currently internal facing, but I'm happy to share if there's interest. Most of these are related to the issuance of a halt or a course correct result. Just to give you a sense of scope, once an assessment results in a halt, we initiate a series of engagements with their executive leadership and their delivery team to discuss next steps. A halt is not a cease and desist in most cases. It usually is a halt to the overall approach that an initiative is deploying to push the team to either go back a few steps and do a bit of thinking, or take a significantly alternate approach. It is our attempt to essentially de-risk the delivery of an initiative. I think a triumph that I would like to talk about is around chatbots. So a few months back, we started to see a lot of interest in launching chatbots to answer questions. And these launches were primarily tech-driven, with components of user research and performance measurement essentially missing. So from a tech perspective, there is a bot that can take a query and respond, but is that response helpful? Or what the user expected anyway? How can we make it less frustrating? Were some of the questions we started to ask. Of course, there were some hard conversations, but when we offered resources to conduct user research, to better understand this space. And we basically acknowledged we hope to learn from this user research too. We got the support that we needed to move on. We conducted user research and came up with guidance on what goes into creating a good chatbot. And now all we have to do is point to that effort. Every single time we get a chatbot, a team knows these are the steps to consider. So chatbots per se are not the problem, just like any tech. The way we implement these and nurture these and keep them live and well makes all the difference. And that's what we push the team to do. We've partnered with them ever since, and there's some good work happening in that area.
That's so cool. That I mean, so we're not just supposed to build something and then walk away, leave it, and hope that it, you know, stays good. I say jokingly and also sadly, truthfully. Okay, pivot to some questions. This ties exactly to what you just said, which is, you know, how are you measuring that this process has improved products? You talked, you know, do you have KPIs? Do you know, how do you know that you're doing the right thing? And the chatbot was a great example. Any others to surface up for that question?
So measurement is something that we haven't nailed yet. The process, if you look at it, it's still new. So 3 years into the process, and not every initiative is coming to us at a pre-discovery stage. So we're meeting initiatives wherever they are in their service design journey. I think measurement would make a whole lot of sense when we have initiatives that have passed through different stages of the assessments, and we'll be able to report on those. But overall, I think the way we're measuring the success of this service, of course, is through quantitative and qualitative feedback from delivery teams. These DFA stories where we're able to kind of highlight the learnings, and most of our champions are teams that have received either a course correct or a halt. We're also measuring uptake. So we started with, you know, a certain number of assessments at the beginning. Most teams weren't paying attention, but then you start to see 1 or 2 teams come in from a specific ministry and they have good things to share. And then you see a lot more uptake. So uptake in the service, like we're actually pretty maxed out, and we had to come up with criteria to actually triage the requests for assessments that are coming in, just to be able to, you know, deliver the service at a certain point. So I think there is a lot of interest in what we're doing. There is a lot of uptake, and that's how we're measuring success.
That makes a lot of good sense. And yeah, I can see why there would be some attractiveness to starting to share that and like help make sure that you're actually going through that process and diving in together, especially when a ministry is engaged in those activities continuously. A bit of a pivot here, and kind of ties in to probably maybe how the legislation works, or does Government of Ontario have a government-wide data maturity model, and does that fit in here in terms of the government frame or governance frame?
We do. So the Ontario government does have a digital maturity model, a framework. It was developed a few years back by my predecessor, Laura, so we established that model based on our learnings from different jurisdictions. Not only did we establish the model, we actually ran digital maturity workshops with every single ministry in the Ontario Public Service to basically gauge where are things right now, establish a baseline metric. And there were a few surprises, but mostly they tallied with what our understanding of the state of digital maturity was across the OPS. We have a lot of work to do, but what we were able to do with that framework or that model is establish firstly the 3 or 4 different brackets of level of digital maturity. What are the characteristics for each of those? And then where does which ministry lie? And what we've started to think about now that this report and work has been completed is how might we now start to address the challenges that were highlighted through that work? So not every ministry is at the same point. So what I want to be able to do for someone who is learning in a learning phase versus in an emerging phase are significantly different. So we started to kind of think about those things and push the boundaries a little bit to help teams out.
Awesome. It's always tough to figure out how you kind of meet people where they're at, and I've heard you say that a few times as we've gone through this. And so again, key to kind of figuring out that piece. There is a question here that says, to the best of your knowledge, what are the differences between Ontario and BC in terms of digital governance? I'm not sure if that's, a good question. Happy to take that question offline, perhaps, and have that be a podcast question where I'm thinking we could bring JP Fournier, who leads our digital investment office, into that conversation so that we can give you a fulsome answer. But I just wanted to note that we'll acknowledge that one at a different time with you. And another one that's popping up. So you touched on this a little bit, but do departments voluntarily choose to say play ball and go that sort of digital first route? Are you having to compel them into that? What's your gut say on that?
So I will touch on this a bit later. Again, change is hard. We do need to understand that and acknowledge that. And I think my biggest learning is approach it with your empathy hat on. I mean, it's one thing to push for compliance and get people to do a certain thing a certain way, but that's not how sustainable change happens. When you're able to demonstrate value in that changed approach is when the game changes, because then you've been able to demonstrate that there is significantly different approaches that are much leaner, much more efficient. And people across the OPS, I know, want to do the right thing. They just don't believe in that approach. But when they see it once or twice, then you have a partner. Then you have a champion who's going to talk to 10 more people to do it. So the way we've looked at it is there is legislation. There are directives in place. Our work with embedding this into the funding model is ongoing. So for anything that is going to seek funding, they will need to go through this model. But again, these are levers that we've put in place just to create that awareness and push the boundaries a little bit. The true nature of things will change only when people believe in what you're doing makes sense.
I love that. And I'm sad that we have so many questions that have come in that we haven't had time to get to, but I'm also excited because what that means is that we can dig into those more deeply in the podcast and actually get some more of those pieces. And in particular, I think, talking about that like ideal stage and that, what that really looks like for Ontario and where you are, and maybe what that looks like for BC as well. So I'm going to give you one last final word here, and then we have to end for today. Any closing thoughts, Namita?
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's awesome to be here. I look forward to the other questions that we can tackle together. My only last thought would be, change is hard. We need to bring our empathy hat on and work with teams as partners. We do run this evaluation service, but we've always talked about it as a peer-to-peer review. And I think that has taken us a long way.
I love that so much. Thank you so very much for your time today. Very much appreciate it, as do everyone on the call. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon, folks. We'll see you again next month with JP Fournier on digital investment to really dovetail into this.
Awesome.
Thank you.